Thank you so much for joining us for our Let's Talk About It session with director Ely Sonny Orquiza, with Dan Rabinowitz, to talk about all things directorial for the Two Gentlemen of Verona. Um, Feel free to include like questions that you have in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat. Um, if this is your first time to Let's Talk About It, why don't you, if you can throw up an emoji, a heart emoji, go for it. Anybody? Oh, we've got a bunch of veterans here. Oh, we've Diana. Excellent. Okay, how many of you have seen a Let's Talk About It before? I know many of you have, so welcome again for folks. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. For those of you who want to catch other Let's Talk About It, we have them on our YouTube channel, which is at SF Shakes /videos. And our last Let's Talk About It was a wonderful talk with Dr. Will Tosh, who has spoken with us before. And then coming up in September, which is right around the corner, can you believe it, y'all? Is a talk with Dan and 4 members of the cast of the Two Gentlemen of Verona. We have the 2 gents, and in fact, the 2 ladies, to talk about their experience in rehearsing and performing in the Two Gentlemen of Verona in the Bay Area. Thank you all so much for joining us. We have, you can check out our schedule, performance of free shakes, see when we come close to you. Bring your friends, bring a picnic, bring your dogs. All are welcome. And if you haven't, please register for that. Let's Talk About It on September 8th. And if you want to hear or read more about Ely's thoughts on directing Two Gentlemen of Verona, we have an interview with our literary intern, Shiva, who has a blog on Ely's thoughts on our website as well. And now, without further ado, I'm so excited to hand this over to Dan and Ely to talk about this play. Thank you.
Terrific. Carla, thank you very much. And thank all of you for joining us again today. It's always a great pleasure for us to be here. And it's also a very special pleasure when we move in our cycle of Let's Talk About Shakespeare events from scholars and independent thinkers when we move to our own creatives. And that's always a very exciting and rewarding transition to make. And I am absolutely thrilled that we have today as our discussant, Ely Sonny Orquiza, who is one of the most talented young directors in the Bay Area and who has done a truly wonderful and interesting job in directing Two Gentlemen of Verona. For us, it's an unusual and deeply engaging production. For those of you who have seen it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And for those of you who haven't, it's not a spoiler alert to say that it's really worth watching and an enormously fun production. I want to add one thing at the risk of embarrassing Ely before we actually begin talking about this, which is that I always get to attend a number of the performances. And one of the things that I heard sotto voce from the tech crew in our production was about Ely, and I really wanted to share it because our tech crew worked with many directors and many actors. And one of them took me aside and said, you know, Ely is the most composed, balanced, coolest director, unfazable as disasters ensue in the rehearsal process. Ely absolutely will not be phased. And so that's really an amazing compliment for a director coming from the tech crew. So Ely, I wanted to share that before we even begin. But I thought what would be helpful and be interesting for people would be to hear a little bit about Ely's own background and about the intellectual journey that took him, whether at Cal or before or later, um, that took him towards Shakespeare and ultimately towards the San Francisco Shakespeare Festival. So, Ely, tell us a little bit about how you, as a director, came to Shakespeare and what some of your thoughts and ideas are about working in this amazing 400-year-old vein.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dan. I think, I shared briefly with you that I first went into my conservatory as an actor from UC Berkeley. And right away after I graduated from my training as an artist, I immediately felt that I came through or to the theater through stories that did not see themselves on stage. I was yearning so much for Asian American stories, for queer stories. And I think that for me became my compass as a director, even before Shakespeare entered the room.
Mhm.
My work always lived at the edge of classical and new writing, queer and Asian American stories, and really training young artists as an educator too. So that blended my approach um, to this 400-year-old, stories and books and all of that. Um, for me too, my approach to being in this community is that, and what I love about SF Shakes is that the openness makes the experience less rigid, especially for the community that the entire production goes through, from Cupertino to Redwood City to San Francisco. And what I love about it is that there is a particular electricity to outdoor theater that cannot be replicated indoors.
Yes.
The
Yes.
absence of the walls that we usually have in the theater um, becomes this, we blur that line between the actors and the audience. So instead of being enclosed in a controlled environment, audiences and actors are both at the mercy of the same conditions. The sun is there, the gust of the wind, punctuating moments that are tense. There's something beautiful too. I remember when in the show we have one particular soundscape of crows, and it was just one soundscape that became an echo. The first week of rehearsal, it activated crows from Cupertino too. So there is this, you know, alchemy of being outdoors and being in the elements. And I think that's what I love about, outdoor theater and SF Shakes in general. And also it reminds us that in the theater, it's alive, it's porous, it's also very unpredictable.
Well, Ely, it's so interesting. I want to unpack about five different things from your from your from your comments that we can talk about, because so many of them are so interesting. And let me start, I think, by your intellectual, emotional, and moral drive towards an inclusive approach to theater, an approach to theater that integrates widely disparate backgrounds, experiences, gender preferences, and ideas. And I think one of the really remarkable and interesting things about this production is the way in which that not only works in presenting Two Gentlemen, but the way in which that seems utterly natural in presenting the stories that Shakespeare is telling in this play. There's no sense of forced, you never feel that something's been leveraged into your consciousness as you're watching this. And yet it is an enormously inclusive kind of a presentation, thanks in large part to your artistic leadership, Ely. And I think it's, in a sense, it's a tribute both to the excellence of the direction, to the commitment on the part of SF Shakes to being Shakespeare for all, both for audiences and performers and artistic creatives alike, and to the engagement of the cast that you chose with these 400-year-old materials. You know, it doesn't feel forced in any way. It feels completely natural to see these different things, including the gender transpositions that are, you know, they're just a part of what we put on. And so it works. I need to say that.
Yeah, I think, you know, my approach has always been inclusive in the theater. And I think I start regardless of what companies or what processes that I, you know, find myself in, that theater is for everybody, and stories belong to everyone, not just to those who can afford the ticket, or speak the dominant language, or who see themselves reflected in the traditional canon. I think inclusion in theater is both who gets to make it and who gets to experience it. Speaking as an artist, I think inclusion means building a rehearsal room and the ensemble where diverse identities and cultures and artistic practices are welcomed and valued. And that is very evident in the way that we built the entire team for us. We have such a diverse group of artists who are locally based in San Francisco, very intergenerational. And also, I think that just means it's also about dismantling the gatekeeping structure in the American theater.
Yes.
And ensuring that the voices that we amplify come from historically excluded backgrounds, BIPOC, queer, immigrant, disabled, working class, aren't just the existing models, but also centered and celebrated. And I think for the audience side, and I think Carla and SF Shakes talk about this too, that oftentimes it may be people's first time with Shakespeare. And I think I love that we start from there, because it means that inclusion means meeting people where they are at. And I think outdoor theater is a perfect embodiment of that, because it removes the financial barrier. It removes the architectural and the cultural barriers of this entire process. So there's no dress code. There's no expectation to be silent or to be still. So it doesn't have to alienate people who are coming into the theater for the first time, especially for first-time theater goers. So it's very much built into this process that, you know, inclusion is for everybody, who elders who bring in their folding chairs, who so that they can sit comfortably. It's for passersby who literally stop by to see the show. So we start from there, and I think we continue to build on. And I think that's the type of theater that we hope to continue to amplify. And I think I hope that's what Shakespeare wanted, and something that, you know, we continue to practice.
Well, you know, Ely, it's interesting because, you know, part of my background, as some of you probably know, was a decade of working with Shakespeare's Globe in London, the reconstructed Elizabethan theater. And one of the things which is, you know, in which what you are describing, Ely, is the outdoor production of Shakespeare's theater in shared light, shared sound, shared atmosphere, harkens back across 400 years to the way in which these plays were originally presented, with 1,000 or 1,300 people standing in a yard without even any seats, just standing in a yard, drinking ale, eating nuts, passing apples around, being solicited by prostitutes, accosting prostitutes, leaning on the edge of the stage without any of the barriers that our more conventional theater experience has come to embody, with a darkened hall and a brilliantly lit proscenium stage, and people turning around in horror when somebody opens up a cough drop 4 rows back. We do something very, very different in these productions. And what we do is a lot closer to the way in which these plays were acted, in which Shakespeare wrote these plays, his own experience, both as a playwright and as a character actor. He was never a lead, but he was a very good character actor. Was in exactly the kind of shared light, shared sound, shared space, unruly and engaged crowd that you're describing. And I remember once that Mark Rylance, who was the first artistic director at Shakespeare's Globe when it opened, Rylance once said to me, and he has said it on other occasions as well, it wasn't a private comment, but he has said to me that the thing that he learned most from the experience of beginning to put on plays in the open air at the Globe with no separation between the actors and the audience was that Shakespeare wrote these plays with the expectation that the audience was going to be a character in the play at every stage of the proceedings. And what you were saying resonated so deeply with me in this sense that the kind of work that you're doing and the kind of work that have done in Two Gentlemen and the kind of work that San Francisco Shakespeare does really reaches directly back across more than 400 years to the way these plays were originally conceived and presented. And it's absolutely wonderful. So let me jump to the question of Two Gentlemen itself.
Yeah.
It's an early play. It's a complicated play. It's a play with knotty problems that are embedded in it to anybody who actually reads it. It's a play in which the seeds of future theater greatness are readily to be found, as seeds which flower in Twelfth Night, in Richard III, in Macbeth, in in As You Like It, in lots of different places. So what brought you as a director to Two Gentlemen of Verona, Ely? What was on your mind when you thought about putting that show up for San Francisco Shakespeare Festival?
Yeah, great question. Originally I pitched to Pratisha and Carla Comedy of Errors.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, there had been plenty of other productions in the Bay Area. A couple of months ago, we just had Comedy of Errors at ACT. Before that, there was one in Silicon Valley, and there's another one happening sometime this fall. So there's at least 5 of them. So it didn't make sense to continue to stage Comedy of Errors, and
Right.
Immediately went into this idea of Two Gentlemen of Verona.
So what took you there? I mean, it's such an interesting choice from the 36 plays in the canon.
Right.
Intense, interesting.
Yeah, for me as a director, I'm always asking questions for myself on, why this play now, and what are you willing to destroy to make it matter? And for me, my process is all about deconstruction, not just adaptation. And I think, for this production of Two Gentlemen of Verona, the best appeal for me is that it has not been staged in the last decade or so. So there is that, like impulse to do Two Gentlemen of Verona, but also thinking about what are some of the questions in this play that were really difficult or hard or a challenge for a director to do. And part of that is being at the problem play and the last moment of the play. And I've always been so interested in that. And
by the way, we're not going to worry about spoiler alerts. We're just going to talk about the play. You'll all go to see it anyway. Go ahead.
So I think for me, problematic texts always come as an opportunity. It's not so much about avoiding that moment, but really leaning into the discomfort of a text. So it became a laboratory for me of asking, how do we handle moments in the canon that are troubling? Do we cut it? Do we reframe it? Or do we lean into the discomfort of it? And I think the rarity and the freshness of that excites me the most as a director. One, it hasn't been seen for a long time. There's a lot of familiar Shakespearean tropes happening in Two Gents as well. And also, I think for me too, as a queer Asian American artist, choosing this play to stage, choosing this play to direct for a contemporary audience, signals for us a moment of courage and curiosity. For me, it's not about, we're not just here to repeat what's been done before, but we're here to ask new questions of the canon. It's all about comedy and the critique of it. It's about inquiry and accessibility, and that's what excites me. And it's playful and it's very problematic, and it's very raw and resonant. So there's a lot of dualities in this play that I thought was a great, or even a perfect playground for both outdoor theater. And for me, who's all about inclusion and provocation for the stage.
So Eli, I've had the great good fortune to not only be able to see the production a couple of times, but also to see both the first read in our warehouse on Davidson Avenue, and also to be allowed to sit in for some of the rehearsals as well. So I think one of the questions that was on my mind that I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on is, what did you learn as the director from the first read as your actors read through this play for the first time? What are the things that you took away from that were new to you as the director?
Yeah, great question. We have such an excellent cast, and the four core principal artists that are playing Proteus, Valentine, Julia, and Sylvia are so close to each other. And, it illuminated something new to me in terms of how to approach the characters. I one of the biggest is the relationship between the characters. And during this entire process, I was also putting my dramaturgical hat in that we learned that all of the events happen so fast. And we learned that even from the community reads of like, this doesn't make sense. How can we make this sense? How can we make a sense out of this? But I think the biggest illumination for me is how Julia, for example, is a strategist, right? Her disguise is a tool. It's not a joke. Her love letters move the plot. And I think for me as a director, I'm learning that, her letters that she create or that she gets has the same weight as the swords in Shakespeare's world.
Yes.
That every time she reads, something changes on stage. And I say this, and I continue to say this, that Sylvia is one of the powerful female characters in Shakespeare world. And during the table read, I'm learning that she's a truth teller. She tests love with action, and she uses the court's rule against it. And her stillness is active, and her silence is not consent. And thinking about Proteus, how he's so hungry for status and love, and that, we show the moments that he learns that language can get him what loyalty cannot. And we track each time his choice become a physical tell-all, a glove remove and a ring turned is a shift. And thinking about Valentine, it's about, it's so funny because, like the actor, Tyler, feels pretty much Valentine in some sense, in that there's naivete in the actor, but also the bravery in the way that he's playing the character. He has this heart that thinks public honor equals moral right. And I think for me, blocking him stepping forward into light whenever he believes that he's right is something that is a gesture that we're creating in terms of the relationship and the character building. So there's so much that I learned during that week, even with, looking at time. Because we've set this play in a contemporary time, we thought about what is the equivalent of, a horseback, a carriage to now being, a car, and how long is it going to take? If it took them 3 months to go from Verona to Milan by car or by plane, how long does it, take from the Midwest to California? So there was a lot of contemporary um, acknowledgement and parallel that we're creating with the text so that it makes sense to us. And we can play with the text as if we're in a playground and make choices that feel right to the world that we're building in.
It's interesting because one of the observations I was going to make for us to think about is that I think when I think about this production, one of the areas of real excellence, I think, in your work, Ely, is the casting of the four principals. And they really, and without in any way taking away from the excellence of the rest of the actors, which is quite evident and widely distributed, the four principals really inhabit their roles in remarkable ways. They really do. Both Proteus, Valentine, Julia, Sylvia, they're very present in these roles in every way. And it's and I for those of you who have not seen it, I will share one thing which is in no wise a spoiler, but by the fifth act, the entire, Ely and I've had this conversation before, that by the fifth act, the entire audience is engaged vocally with what's going on and what's going to happen in this play. It is a remarkable thing. It's not just a generic feature of outdoor theater. This is an audience which is just as engaged as a Globe audience would have been in 1594. They're in there pitching for their characters, and I think that's a testament to the way in which these four excellent young actors really both differentiate and carry off the engagement and the relationships among themselves.
Yeah, and what I love about that, especially in Cupertino, is that we mentioned this earlier about the audience being a character and being part of it. But by the time that we get into Act 5, I really felt this sense that the audiences became the judge of this entire story. I mean, Two Gents is about betrayal. It's about loyalty and forgiveness. And when you invite the audiences to wrestle with some of the big questions that's happening at the end of the play, instead of us dictating the answer, we help frame an invitation for them to take part. It actually provokes the audiences to pass the judgment, and allowing them to sit in their discomfort or approval became part of that storytelling. And really kind of having this broken frame of rift between what's happening on stage and what they're feeling as an audience member. Yeah, it was a beautiful kind of like acoustic of sounds.
They're engaged. They're engaged, Ely. They're engaged. They are engaged. And what's interesting is that some of this engagement, and again, this is not a spoiler because those of you who have seen the production know exactly what I'm going to say, and those of you who haven't really will I hope want to go see it. A lot of the acting that takes place is physical rather than textual. And in particular, I wanted to come back to sort of unpack one of the things you said earlier, Ely, about silence and about the nature of silence. And of course, all of us as modern people focus on the question of the fact that Sylvia has no more lines in this resolution in Act 5 from this terrible situation to one which is awkward, perhaps better, complex, morally laden, fraught. All of those things come to mind. But what you brought out in this production was not just textual engagement of these four principles, but it's also the physical engagement. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about how you framed that and how you got that out there. It's a very, very good Act 5.
Oh, thanks, Dan. I shared this with the actors a lot, and I told them that, silence is never neutral. It can be comic, it can be intimate, or it can be deeply unsettling. And I think especially in how it reveals whose voices Shakespeare amplified and who he silenced. The women never speak anymore after that, moment of violence that happens at the end of it. And I think for me, instead of resisting what that means for us, I actually use that as a tool to provide agency for women, and how silence can be a tool of empowerment, especially both for Sylvia and for Julia. There's so much emotional weight in those silence, and I think it's so subtle what we built in this world, in that their physical gesture is their texts. So there was a lot of interplay between the physical and the verbal in the Act 5, and you can see the resistance and the subversion of women, and how they use that as a moment of empowerment. Sylvia is rolling her eyes, and Julia is shaking her head at some moments when, I think it was we just kind of sort of took it as a radical tool to create that space for the characters, and to really provide them that tool to kind of resist. And especially because I talk about subversion a lot, especially with the actors earlier on in the process. And I also want to give Neil a big congratulations on this, because in terms of the set, right, the moment that the actors, or the moment that the audiences enter the space, for me, subversion starts the moment that they walk in. Even the play begins, because we're already playing with their expectations. You come into an outdoor theater, which usually means openness, which usually means freedom, a sense of being outside. And then boom, you are greeted with a proscenium. The most traditional theater frame you can imagine, sitting right there under the open sky. And that begins with the subversion. For me, that the clash of the outdoor space and the proscenium is our first signal that we're not following the rules. We want the audience to feel the mix of recognition and the surprise, to laugh at the absurdity, to start questioning, and then from there we keep pushing. So yeah, it feels like for me as a director, I'm building and building and building so that we arrive at a place that is intentional. And for those folks that have seen it, I think they know what I'm talking about in terms of, the space, and also the ending. But for those, who have not seen the show, I'm so curious and happy
Ely,
to experience it. Yeah.
It is so interesting. One of the things we talked about with Will Tosh, when Will was giving us a kind of a scholarly perspective on this interesting early play, was Arthur Quiller Couch, the great Victorian critic's comment about the play, which is that if you read the play properly, there are no gentlemen in Verona. Neither Valentine nor Proteus can justly be called gentlemen. And I'm so interested by your comment, which I thought was very insightful, about Valentine as someone who mistakes convention for morality. And that in some respects, part of what happens in this play is Valentine's awakening to the distinction between the two, even leaving aside the question of the resolution or the possible resolution of his relationship with Proteus. his recognition in Act 5 that in fact there might actually be a material differentiation between convention and moral is really an axial point, I think, in his character's development.
Yeah, I think, the characterization of Valentine for me situates him as a man of earnest ideals, that he's genuinely believing he's doing what's noble and what's right. And yet he doesn't always see how his sense of honor is socially constructed
That's,
rather than morally sound. So his sincerity makes him sympathetic. His bravery makes him compelling, and I think his naivete makes him a lot more dangerous in the entire play.
that's yes, yes,
So
almost disastrously so for the women. I mean, it's a close run thing.
yeah, yeah, and so I think for us when we were building the character in the room, and I think I have Tyler to thank for this, in that, you know, his character is so four-dimensional in the way that he built it. So in terms of, his sincerity, we we discovered that he means what he says when he says on stage, and his words often carry weight because he come from a place of genuine conviction. And his bravery, he takes risks and he acts decisively. But his bravery can often come without wisdom and can
Yes,
cross into this impulsiveness, making him blind to consequences. Uh,
yes.
and
He's a
he
foolish young man in many ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. So like we were able to mold this character into what we see now. We resonate with, Valentine a lot because he's relatable, and he's doing what he's right. So we started from there, and I think it continues to build, and it, all of these actors made my work so easy as a director.
Well,
They're
Eli, it's interesting because there are some scholars who, having taken due account of Shakespeare's personal drive for social self-aggrandizement, his drive to get himself a coat of arms, his drive to reclaim what he believed, what we are pretty sure he believed to be his family's rightful place among, at a minimum, country gentry, certainly not in the aristocracy, and his acceptance overall of hierarchical structures in society. There are some scholars who've looked at this play as a kind of almost a biting young man's parody of courtly behavior and the prerogatives and noblesse oblige that ought to be associated with social rank. I think what you have done in this production is you have excavated a much deeper set of emotional truths about these people, and that they're not really parodic characters. They may be foolish, they're certainly young, they may often be mistaken, but you have, in this production, you have taken it a very different direction from the direction that some of those critics have commented on, and you've taken it in a direction that is much more focused on the emotional truth of these multiple relationships.
Yeah, and I think that's very intentional in our part in building this world. I was less interested in approaching the entire play through commedia dell'arte sense, although we borrowed from it so that they can start exploring the archetype of these characters. But I think that was limiting us in terms of, creating a four-dimensional characters. You see Sylvia enjoying herself the first time we meet her, and then later on we see a different side of her in that she's very active and very powerful. And we see all of those in terms of different characters. And I think part of it too is that as a director, I was able to tell the actors of where is the arc and where is the journey of your character, so that they're not just a straight line, but it's more so like a valley of ups and downs, but the core of it is that they're all pursuing something, and whether that be love, whether that be status, letting that be a motivation to do their part. And I think that allowed us to continue to uplift the human or the humanity of these characters, as opposed to just creating a stock characters without any emotional truth. And I think that was, the one of the main ways that I celebrate with the actors, in that we're very successful in that, in creating that
Well,
essence.
you can see that engagement on the part of the audience, because literally, the audience in Act 5 is, it's like, judging who gets kicked off the island. The audience in Act 5 is really engaged with this and how this is going to come out, and vocally so. It's a fascinating departure from the proscenium model, but it is a departure which I think is truly, deeply true to the way in which the play was originally conceived and written, and ultimately originally produced in the late 16th century. It's a terrific achievement, and it all revolves around the emotional honesty, albeit the foolishness of, and in some instances the perfidy of these characters. It's a genuine success with a problem play that is notoriously difficult to actually do. So we are all in your debt, Ely. And I see from my clock that just before Carla jumps in and twists my arm and says, "By the way, Dan and Ely, it's now time for us to get the audience involved today." So we are now at the point where we hope that people will have questions or comments, including brickbats, to throw our way. And Ely and Carla and I will endeavor to respond as best we can. But this is always, as with everything that San Francisco Shakes does, this is always an inclusive process. So Carla, over to you, and help us understand what our fellow Shakespeare nerds and buffs want to talk about.
Great, thank you. Highlighting, we had some folks submit questions in advance. Thank you. I think a lot of what they brought up in the past, you both have touched on, in terms of unpacking of this, what some folks have termed a problem play, and how that resonates in today's audience, in terms of Kirk had asked about making space for female voices and views. And I think, Ely, you've talked about that in terms of the silences in that fifth act. Question, I have to say it, sorry y'all, because it came earlier and then somebody lifted it up. What about those penis jokes? Can we just tackle those penis jokes?
Well, Ely, you want to help us with cod pieces and short swords, if you would, please.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of penis jokes in this play. The use of sword as symbolic gesture to a penis. There was a lot of that mention between Lance and Speed. I mean, for me, knowing that this is going to be a family-friendly play, we've got a lot of those, but the only penis joke that we really kind of kept is when Julia and Lucetta are talking about, her disguise and needing to have a cod piece to illustrate that she's a man. But otherwise, we've cut all of them. But there's plenty in this play.
Well, it speaks, both the costuming choice and the directorial choice speak to the fluidity with which we are able to in an inclusive way approach gender issues in both in the production and in SF Shake. So I think it speaks well for Carla and Ely both in this regard, and also for the actors who are able to keep a straight face while they're while they're discussing while they're discussing this particular piece of achieving male agency on behalf of a woman character.
Any more questions? I asked folks to mention some tropes, familiar tropes that you had brought up, Ely, because as Kirk had pointed out, many people think that this is one of Shakespeare's first plays, if not the very first.
Right.
There's no definitive answer, but where are folks seeing those tropes? You'll see, if you see this play, you'll notice that there's a lot of things that are resonating in that make an appearance in later plays. One that I definitely am hearing differently now is Proteus mentions that the more similar to Helena in Midsummer, but Proteus uses language such as the more that Sylvia spurns him like a spaniel, he will continue pursuing, just like Helena does. And so
you've
I
heard
just
that in
find it
MSND. You've heard that
exactly.
in MSND for sure.
And also in Taming, Taming of the Shrew.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, the whole idea of the women seeking agency through dressing as men, you know, takes us to Twelfth Night, takes us to As You Like It, takes us a lot of different places in Shakespeare, and the self-conscious nature, almost the ruminative nature of Proteus's villainy, really, in a sense, takes us towards Macbeth, takes us towards Edmund, takes us towards Richard III, takes us in a lot of different directions of the self-conscious villain in
There's Iago.
Cymbeline, yes, indeed. Diana,
everybody thinks it's
Cymbeline, indeed.
So lovely, yes. Kirk, I see you have your hand raised. You want to ask your question in person?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, guys. This is a tremendous conversation. A serious question and a less serious one. Serious one is, unfortunately, because of personal circumstances, I couldn't fly up this year. I'm in Huntington Beach. And is there any chance this was recorded?
At this, I wish, Kirk, at this time, we have not recorded it to share with the general population. I know we have in the past, like right after pandemic, we had been sharing it and having these open watch parties, which were really fun for folks to see the show outside of the area. But as of now, that is not an option. But I do want to ask folks too, from share emoji or put it in the chat. How many of you all have seen a production of the Two Gentlemen of Verona?
Oh, what a good question, Carla. What a good question.
When I asked our cast, basically only, I think Brennan, because Brennan was in it in a past.
Was the dog.
that relates to my question.
Kirk, what was your second question?
Second question is, in 2019 down here at UCI, the New Swan Festival, they did Two Gentlemen, and they solved the dog problem by having a gigantic black Labrador. What did you do with a crab?
Well, I hear this may be the one spoiler alert which I don't want to share with the people who have not seen the production yet. It is a very interesting and, at least in my experience, entirely unique take on the question of how to deal with the crab question. I think we have to leave it at that. Carla, do you agree with me in that?
Yeah, spoilers, people, spoilers. Bert, you have your hands raised.
Well, I wanted to answer the question about whether I've seen Two Gentlemen of Verona. I have not been able to see, except for the 30 seconds in Shakespeare in Love, where they do a
Yes.
little bit of that.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
a production of the original, but I have seen the musical
Yes.
version.
Yes.
And I saw that in the park.
The Galt McDermott version.
Yes.
Yes.
They did, New York Shakespeare people did in the park. And I've always wanted to see a production of it. It's hardly ever done. I don't think it was ever done in Shakespeare's lifetime. At least nobody seems to find it. But it's a really interesting play.
It is, and you know, one of the things that I didn't mention, but I probably should, which is that among the wonderful things about this play, at least in my view, is this play presents the very first of what is a long string of truly great songs that Shakespeare wrote in the question of who is Sylvia. And we have one of the things that Ely and Carla did bring to us is a wonderful young composer, Jen Coogan, who has written a terrific setting of Who is Sylvia that is genuinely worth hearing. We ought to figure out at least how to record that piece of the production. We really should do that, because it's a very, very nice piece of this. And it is without any of us really knowing whether this was exactly the first play Shakespeare wrote that was produced. This is definitely the first great song that he wrote, and it's well handled here in Ely's production.
I do have to say thank you, Kirk, for uplifting. Like, don't forget to repost the donate link. If you all enjoy these, let's talk about it. If you believe that art should be accessible for everyone, feel free to donate to SF Shakes and support the programs that we do, reaching out to folks in multiple communities and making art accessible, having free Shakespeare in the park. You truly mean the world to us as you help us be part of our community and help us continue making these programs accessible for everyone. Any last questions? Put them in the chat.
Thank you all for joining us. It's a huge pleasure for all of us at SF Shakes to be able to gather with our friends and supporters and fellow Shakespeare nerds to talk about this stuff. We really enjoy each other's company. And I want to make sure that we all give a huge internet round of applause for Ely for a truly insightful discussion of the directorial process. So I think we all learned something from it. Ely, thank you very much. And come see the show.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody. Come see the show. Thanks for being here.
Take care, everybody.